Hello. Quick check-in with an inconvenient the inconvenient Indian. I think it's the inconvenient Indian. An account by Thomas King of Native peoples in North America. This chapter is one name to rule them all. As he says in this chapter thing, it's a takeoff on the famous thing from J.R.R. Tolkien of one ring to rule them all, one ring, one ring to something, one ring to in the darkness gather that bind them. Oh, I'm terrible at my thing, but it's basically, that whole thing of power of the name. We'll give them one name and we'll control them and we'll bind them. Which is indeed the policy that Canadian and American government pursued. Actually, he starts out this chapter by like, well, why didn't the white settlers, why didn't they just kill everybody? And he says he's been to enough kind of demonstrations and stuff like that where he's heard basically that comment from the Yahoos, that dark part of that, maybe less rare, openly racist part of Canadian and American culture, which is just like, we should have killed y'all. And he says like, yeah, why didn't they just bomb all of Japan with nuclear bombs at the end of World War II? Why didn't they work their genocides? Actually, doesn't mention the Germans, because they really did come close to that, of killing them all, and history remembers them for that. But yeah, so it's interesting. It's definitely a chapter about basically these inconvenient Indians. We need to gather them up. We need to move them up. We need to come up with a name. Just basically kind of amalgamate them together. We're like, it's just too difficult for white culture to kind of conceptualize these as various different different cultures with different languages and different cultures. It's like everything just gets kind of compressed together into one manageable thing, and then the policies of moving them off their land into reservations, the Trail of Tears in the United States. Funnily enough, it seems like as the Americans were abandoning, kind of stopping kind of the whole thing of doing treaties, the Canadians started that up. And indeed, King kind of very rightly, kind of angrily says, it's like, yeah, we don't particularly learn any lessons from history. Like, in the 1940s, Canadian government was moving people off of lands and relocating people for their own good, paternalistic good, while that had failed 100 years ago. And he says, like, there's the whole thing of those who don't learn their history are doomed to repeat it. And he says more darkly, yeah, or people who understand their history know exactly what they're doing and how to repeat it when the time comes that they want to do stuff like that. That there is a conscious kind of subjugation, a conscious effort to exterminate the native that very stubbornly refuses to die. One of the things that could slap me up over the head, which I knew already, and this is also from having been reading The West Beyond the West at the moment, is that I live in Victoria, and I live on land that was the Songhees nation land, and that the Songhees got shifted. They got given land in perpetuity by our original kind of rather kind of despotic governor, but given in perpetuity. And he actually, to his credit, Douglas, Alexander or James Douglas, refused to renege on that while he was in office. Unfortunately, after he was out of office, the fur trading clique had lost power, and this was all about settlers, and settlers were very much more hungry for land than fur traders, the HBC stuff. And this was the railway, and it's like, we're here for land development. So the Songhees got shoved off again to Esquimalt. I live in Victoria. I live in West Victoria, Vic West. That's the word I'm looking for. And Esquimalt is that away, which makes me kind of painfully aware that most likely the house that I own, co-own, and sitting in most likely benefits from that policy that the Songhees were moved off this land, and white settlers came on, and through a chain of legal documents, and I live on land that was the Songhees nation's land, and they were shoved aside, and that's going to be a reckoning, I guess. Hopefully, it's going to be a reckoning, and it's going to be difficult for people like myself who actually own land on there, and yeah. It's a very sobering thought. It's one of these thoughts of like, I intellectually know, I am a part of a settler culture, the people who pushed native peoples off of their lands. And it's sort of one thing to know that intellectually. It's another thing to know it's like, I own land that was once was the Songhees people's land. So yeah, that's probably the big striking thing from this chapter for me. And that's obviously coming at it from my very own personal reaction to it. I find it like it's a really good book. It's a angry, biting book, in a just like, I'm gonna just use these facts to just slice and dice the freaking state of things, in a very kind of present day, kind of talking about present day stuff, but by saying like, here's the history, folks. I do like that King is looking at it in a very kind of global fashion. I have so far in my very limited work have just, I've done Clearing the Plains, which is focusing very much on the prairies. I'm reading The West Beyond the West at the moment, which is more of a political socioeconomic history of British Columbia, but it's just like, it's one area, and it's I'm finding it useful having King's kind of much more wide-ranging look at all stuff. It does make it that much harder to kind of hold on to. I'm glad that I have the background I have so far, but even then I feel like I'm kind of holding on with my fingernails. I'm definitely listening to a very smart guy who's got very deep knowledge about stuff, crack-wise, and put off some really stinging barbs. And I don't know if I am keeping up or not. But yeah, just all this thing, and just the efforts of the U.S. and Canadian governments to try and extinguish Native peoples, to come up with policies that would to discourage their existence, to not even discourage, to actively go after Native people. But it's very hard. I'm finding it very hard to kind of hold on to it. It's definitely one of these books. I think the more I'm listening to it on audiobook, the more I'm going, I really should have this as a, I think it's one of these things, like, I think I'm just going to kind of let it go through me. I'll note a couple of things on here, and then I will buy the ebook, or probably buy the ebook, and take another run at it again, because it's one of these books that there's just so much going on. I feel my limitations, which is, I guess, is a good thing. But this is definitely the starter case, because I can see me picking this up as an ebook and having a completely new experience with it, because so much of it is not sticking in my brain. I think it's that the Songhees is what's coming is stuck in my head at the moment. Yeah, okay, I'll leave it there because I have to go order some Chinese food. All right, more videos later. Here, let me have one more kick at the can of talking about an inconvenient Indian, an account of Native people in North America by Thomas King. I think I'm having a couple of reactions. I mean, number one, I think I went in and was like, oh, this is a non-fiction account of the history of Native peoples. And it's like, as King himself has said, it's an account, not a history. It's not organized like a history. It's more like his personal essays. And very sophisticated essays, not, thesis, here are my points, conclusion, which, for my dull brain would be easy to think. This is Montagna, on Native peoples centering around themes, and I think a part of why I'm having trouble with my chickens is it's one of these things that I think I would have to sit down with a written copy and think about what themes are. And I think the other thing is it's probably more, well, okay, there's two things. There's being white and fragile and going, oh my god, this guy is angry at Canada, at white people, United States, America, settlers, quite justly for what has been perpetrated on these people. And so, you get that kind of thing. I talked about, I'm walking through Songhees land at the moment. That was taken away. That was ripped away. That was stolen. So there's that. But there's also just the thing of how I personally react to anger. And what I think this is healthy, focused, justified anger. And I have trouble with anger. Growing up in an abusive household, anger was a danger, and I kind of react like a frightened child a lot of times around anger, and that's something to keep in mind. It's something to think about. I'll leave it there at the moment. So yeah, I have a rather unfortunate thing of how I deal with anger coming off of other people, which unfortunately extends to my personal life and how I react to people being angry around me, of trying to deal with it, to kind of go, hey, anger can be a positive thing. There's things that you should be angry about so that maybe we can stop doing them, or we can recognize stuff. And that said, I also just need to kind of acknowledge in myself that I get kind of stressed by anger, even when I don't think Thomas King is personally angry at me. He's too smart of a guy to be. He's angry at all of us, and he should be. And Native peoples should be angry, but they should also, and frustrated, and fucking tired of the whole thing. But yeah, I'm walking through an entire neighborhood that is a result of how we dealt with things, and reading an angry in a positive way, not strident and something that should be done. It's like this is fueled by anger. But that doesn't make it invalid. That doesn't make it any more or less valid than if this was a cool intellectual treatise, which I could go, and consider the points and go, oh yes, tut. It's like, no, sometimes things need anger to just behind them. And I get nervous on reading stuff, James Daschuk, Gene Barman, that are works by white authors on issues of about Native people. It's like I owe it, if I actually consider Native people as human beings who deserve to actually, be able to, that they have the right to tell their own story, and they have the right to, have their own emotions and feelings and thoughts about them, that to actually listen to that. And I mean, Thomas King is probably, through at least my head of his connection with the CBC, is the most kind of the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. It's like is a taxpayer-funded organization, is like how I came to know him, is probably about as institutionally safe a figure that I could listen to about stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna keep that in mind. Hey, and then quick check in with chapter 5 of Inconvenient Indian, because I'm trying to kind of get these out as quickly as possible, just so I actually get it into my head. This one is I'm Sorry, which is, it's a combo of kind of a history of the residential schools and their use of how are we going to assimilate Native people, or more bluntly put, how are we going to kill the Indian to save the man? The basically, King coming up at the end with basically a 50% mortality rate for these places overall, from starvation, suicide, and just all the kind of long-ranging kind of cultural devastation that these places wrought on Native people and their societies, their culture. A genocide, plain and simple. A concept that doesn't come out until the late 40s, but this is basically what we're talking about here. And then putting that in context of the apologies that have been offered by Canadian government, and a declaration of acknowledgement of all the wrongs that the U.S. sandwiched in a defense spending bill, with a proviso at the end saying, but this doesn't get used in any legal court against us. So, we're sorry, but we're not responsible, kind of thing. We accept no responsibility for it, even though we acknowledge that we did all this stuff. Just that thing of Stephen Harper standing up and saying we're sorry for residential schools, and then a couple of months later the G6 saying Canada's never had has no history of colonialism, which is just like, okay, I can see that slightly chafing a little when you hear those two statements put together, and how much of bullshit the second one is, and maybe just how much, how seriously Native people can be forgiven for actually taking apologies seriously when they're not really followed up with any actual direct efforts at reparation or reconciliation, a buzzword that has been used a lot by Justin Trudeau in past years, though that seems to have fallen by the wayside as other concerns have come forward, and he's not trying to win election, so he's no longer trying to appear to be the warm, soft, cuddly, left-leaning liberal, but is back to kind of centrist, mainstream Canadian politics, which is be as stingy as possible. I think stingy comes up in a lot of Canadian dealing with the native peoples. It's like, you know, we're going to cheap you out. We value you very, very little, very, very little indeed, as evidenced by, I think, West Beyond the West, they talk about exactly how much was spent on native education versus white mainstream education. It's like, you know, basically half the education budget, and that's, yeah. And yes, so that is my, okay, I'm getting barked at by some other dog now. That's chapter 5 of Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. More videos later.